The bells would not stop. Their bronze throats shook the dark and poured sound across the city like molten metal, spilling between the teeth of the merlins and down the red ramparts, over the onion roofs and hard-baked tiles and slanting alleys where salt and smoke bred a taste like a coin tucked under the tongue. From the window slit of her chamber in Maegor's holdfast, Sansa felt the vibration in the stone as more than noise. It beat through the heel of her palm where she steadied herself against the cold, and through her ribs, and into the damp place behind her eyes that had been brimming so long she had forgotten what it meant to be dry within. Beyond, the river was a black, flexing ribbon. Far off, a smear of green fire feathered the night. Men screamed away, gulls cried when the tide changed. If she pressed her forehead against the casement, she could see the torch chains move along the walls like glowing beads on a string. And below, courtyards full of shadows broke and reformed. The air tasted of tincture and pitch, and the harsh sweetness of wine that had been poured out and left to sour. The queen had gone to the great hall with singers and whores to drown the city's fear in jests and solace. Sansa had been sent away with a soft pat, as if she were an infant who must be laid down out of a quarrel between mothers. The door had shut behind her, bolts sliding with the decisiveness she remembered last from Winterfell's gatehouse on storm nights. She clutched the edge of the sill and thought of snow. Snow did not burn. It lay on roofs with the weight of a quilt. It softened a voice and made even a curse sound muffled. Half asleep, if she touched it with her bare hand, it stung and then surrendered, bluing her fingers. But it did not lick and flare and take. It was not here. Footsteps came down the passage beyond her door. One set, heavy, unhurried. They did not match the rhythm of a gold cloak's patrol, nor the coy swish of maidservant slippers. They paused, and the iron knocker on her door rasped once. Not a courtly knock, but a single rap like the start of a blow. She knew who it was before she turned. The door opened without waiting for her answer. He had not brought a torch. What little light came from the smoldering brazier in the corner found the planes of his face and stopped where the scars dragged them awry. Sandor Clegane filled the doorway as a dark piece of the castle's masonry that had grown legs and learned the trick of breathing. His hauberk was off and his padded jack unlaced at the throat. His breath came slow and deliberate. She smelled the leather that had taken rain and the iron that had taken blood and dried it. "You didn't bolt it," he said. Sansa drew her hands together at her waist. "They told me I was safe here." He made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had been allowed to live a little longer. "They told you that." And the bells told the river to hush, and the river listened. He crossed the room. The brazier's coal bed hissed as a pop of ash rose in draft. He stood at the window slit and looked at the far green smear, and at the little yellow ones that burned without the pretension of sorcery. His throat worked once. The scar tissue made his swallow look like something trying to tunnel beneath a field of burned earth. His eyes were very dark. When he turned, Sansa saw the decision in him. It had the feel of a door flung open on a day too cold to be outside. "Get your cloak," he said. "I have one on. Another, whatever you have. And shoes that will keep your feet when there's no one to carry you." She did not move. "Where would I go?" He came closer. The bells seemed to fall away for a moment, as if the depth of his gaze made a place where sound could not need. "Away," he said. "Out. I'm done carrying their torches. They can keep their fires. I'll take the dark, and I'll take you out of it if you've got the wit to walk when I tell you." Bender won. He had come to her once before, drunk and swaying, the smell of wine on him like a bruised fruit, and his mouth full of words that had rolled around inside him too long. She had been afraid then with the soft fear that accompanied the thought of a man's hand where it should not be. Now she was afraid with the cold fear that accompanied the thought of a world burning and her in it. Both were fears, but they were not the same animal. "You said you would take me home," she said. The word hung there with the absurdity of a child's toy left in a room where knives were stacked. "Is this what you mean?" He looked at the window again, quickly, and away too quickly. If you can walk and hold your tongue. If you can listen when I say listen. If you can sing me no songs. You can put your snow dream on the road and see if it melts. Or you can stay here with the cats and queens and learn how a song ends when the city lights the refrain. She looked at the brazier. Coals shifted, a little cascade of orange pieces into a red hollow. The smell of the city came in and touched the back of her throat. She wanted suddenly not to be told again that she was safe. She wanted to stand up and be cold for a reason. She wanted her hands to do something other than twist each other to bruises. All right, she heard herself say, as if the word had decided and spoken itself. I will go. He had expected to argue. She could see it in the way his shoulders dropped half an inch. Good. He turned his head. Cloak. Now. She moved then, quick and precise, the way she had learned to move when Septa Mordain watched her stitches. She took her gray cloak off the peg and pulled another from the trunk, a travel cloak that had been set aside for a journey that never arrived. She added a plain scarf with a mended place that she hid under the fold and wrapped her hair with it, binding the auburn until only a muted brown showed in the lamplight. She stripped off the fine slippers and pulled on thick stockings and the sturdier boots she had kept, because she could not bear to throw away anything that had touched Winterfell. She took, from the bottom of the trunk where she had hidden it, a small wooden box in which she had saved the needle, the thimble, and the little packets of dried mint that the kitchens sometimes let her keep for her headaches. It was not much. It was everything she could carry with her hands and her heart at the same time. He watched, saying nothing. When she finished, he lifted a cloak of his own from where it had been draped over his arm and shook it once, so the smell of him and the world it had moved through rose and mingled with the smoke. It was rough and black, and mantled, wolfish. He settled it upon her shoulders. It engulfed her entirely. The hem brushed the rushes. She could feel the weight of it not only on her shoulders but down the length of her spine, as if it had laid a dark hand on each of her vertebrae and pressed, saying, "Be bowed now, while you learn, and later you will stand." He blew out the brazier with a swift, contemptuous breath and a swat of his gloved hand. The room became immediate and simple. Stone, air, the faint light of the slit, the two of them. He led her to the door and pressed her back with 2 fingers while he opened it and slid into the passage like a shadow that had learned to wear boots. She heard the way he listened. It was not that he heard better than other men. It was that he knew what noises mattered and respected them. "Stay close," he said without turning his head. "And if you must speak, speak like trouble is a cat in the corner that will run if you are quiet." They went. Maegor's holdfast was full of voices that had not found bodies to clothe themselves in. The banners hung with their bright animals made dull by night, beasts half asleep and watchful. The air had the chill of uncarpeted stone that had known centuries of bare feet and had catalogued them, pitilessly. Twice they waited in alcoves while men passed. First a pair of maidservants in one another's arms, weeping softly, then 3 gold cloaks with the dragfoot gait of men whose barrels had been too near their mouths. Sandor let them go, his lip curling. He tasted every torch that came near. Sansa could see it in the way he tilted his head and set his teeth like a man who had bitten a pepper by accident. At a servant's passage he paused and opened a door that looked no different from any other. Within lay a narrow stair running down into the belly of the holdfast, lit only by a single candle that had gutted itself, and stood a pool of wax with a wick like a dead flower in it. He took the candle, pinched the wick dead, and wedged it in his belt. Darkness thickened. Her hand found his sleeve because it must. He did not shake it off. "Old ways," he said so low she could barely hear him. "Stones no secrets. This one was born when the kings needed to step out without being seen stepping. How do you—" She began and stopped. She thought of telling him of the tunnels of Winterfell, of stories of hidden doors, and the ghost of a king who had walked under the earth to see his enemies' feet pass above him. She said nothing. It felt like something to keep. The weight of the cloak was courage. So was the warmth of his sleeve under her fingers. The stair ended at a wooden door that had been planed smooth so long ago the grain had blurred into a memory of lines. Sandor bent and put his eye to the crack. Sansa held her breath because it was something she could do. After a long moment, he eased the door open. Cold air came in, bringing with it the strong smell of the river and the peculiar sharpness of night grass that had been trampled. Sound changed. It was larger out here, the bells less a hammer and more a depth. They stood within a postern at the foot of the outer wall. It gave on a small court, choked with barrels and wrapped bales, a place that might have been busy all day with commerce, but at night had the abandoned dignity of rooms where old men sleep. On the far side was a wicket gate in the wall's curve, half hidden by a covered cart with a broken wheel. Beyond it, beyond a handful of steps and a line of thorn bush, the city began in earnest. The backs of houses with their windows like closed eyes, the alleys that ran between them like lines cut between knuckles, the thin ladder of sky. They crossed the little court. The pebbles spoke under their boots. From somewhere above, a woman's laughter broke in two and fell apart. Sandor tried the wicket. It stuck. He set his shoulder to it and breathed out through his teeth, and it gave with a whine and a little savage shuddering like a frightened thing. Sansa slid through. The thorn bush caught and tugged at her hem as if to say, "Where?" She shook it off, moved, found herself in a slot of alley that smelled of fish heads and tallow and something minutely sweet, as if a jar of honey had been dropped here and cleaned long ago but never properly forgotten. "Keep that cloak," he said. Eyes down. They did not run. Running meant men looked up, and thinking began in them like a frost. Walking with purpose, but without hurry. Weaving as if home were just 3 turns away. Their path bent and bent again around the city's broken thoughts. Sometimes they took lanes too narrow for their shoulders to walk side by side. Sometimes they came to a wider street and held the edge like a pair of shadows walking along a wall. Twice Sandor stopped and put her behind him with a gesture that brooked no romance, only the practical question of whose body would be between her and steel. At the foot of a slope, where broken cobbles drank starlight, a man lay against a door. His head had burst upon the stone, as if it were a fruit that had been dropped from a wall and forgotten. The flies already knew, and made their dry little clock sound. Sansa stepped over him because there was nowhere else to put her feet. The cloak brushed his outstretched hand, and she did not flinch. She would flinch later, when there was time. The closer they drew to the outer wards, the more the city thumped against its own skin. The gates had been shut. Men gathered at them anyway, as if proximity could change iron into thoughtlessness. Somewhere a voice began to sing, and then stopped, as if someone had put a hand over its mouth. Sandor turned away from the crowd warmth like a man turning his face from a brazier. He led her into a lane that choked itself upon refuse, and then, suddenly, opened into a small square where a statue of a mother with 7 faces had been broken at the waist and lay like a hill the children had once climbed. No children were here now. Sansa found herself breathing through her mouth. She thought of the sept of Baelor, and of a different multitude there, and of the way a crown had been set upon a boy's head, while men shouted in hungry voices. Her hands balled beneath the cloak. But she pressed her nails into her palms. The pain was clean. They reached the river by way of a cheesemonger's quay, where carts came in the mornings to take away wheels wrapped in waxed cloth. Now the carts were gone, and the quay was a large quiet place, with a universe of water opening beyond it. The dark was not absence. It was space. Boats knocked softly together and whispered old wood stories. Across the water, fires jumped like animals upon the far bank, and toward the mouth of the river, the green light rose again, as if something had struck a match in the sky, and then shaken it. Sandor's horse stood where he had left it when he fled the castle earlier, tied in the shadow of a heap of salt barrels. Stranger was not a pretty animal. Even standing still in darkness, something feral about him lived above the level of sight. A smell of sweat that had never learned to share, a readiness that was not patience. The stallion rolled an eye, and the white flash bit a piece out of the night. "Hush," Sandor said, and the word had an old intimacy in it, as if he had said it 1,000 times and half of those to himself. Stranger snorted and stilled. There was a second horse too. Smaller, and of uncertain parentage, tethered near the quay's end. A mare with good legs, and the wary look of an animal that had spent more hours with boys than with grooms. Sandor watched Sansa look at her. "Shall do," he said. "Better than your slippers." He untied the mare and checked her girth by touch alone. He threw Sansa up as if she weighed less than the cloak she wore. She grunted, and then found her seat the way one finds balance on a rocking branch. By thinking of stillness, and letting the world move around it. "Where?" she said. "Not out the gate. Not tonight. Too many men too eager to count other men. South along the river first, find a fisher's lane to slip out by. Then turn and work our way around the city's feet. Kingswood will take us in if we don't wake it. From there we'll find the road when the road's forgotten where it runs. Da. And then? And then we see if your north is still where you left it." They moved, hooves careful on wet stone, then bold on the packed dirt between warehouses. At the end of the lane, Sandor turned them narrow ways along a lip of path where Black River Cheek lapped and sucked, and then through a break in a fence down a line of garden plots that had been turned over and left to sleep. The smell of earth rose up, a kind smell that had nothing to do with kings. In one plot, a row of onion tops had pushed themselves up through neglect. Sansa felt a salt sting at the back of her throat that had nothing to do with the river. But when they reached the place where the riverbank lowered and spread, where poor men pulled their boats up on scraped logs and mended their nets with fingers that had learned thread by learning rope, Sandor dismounted and led Stranger by the cheek. The mare followed without offense. He moved like a man walking beside a cliff, not by sight, but by memory of what height meant. Torches flared at intervals along the water, and each time the light reached them, Sansa felt him tighten, a full body clench like a hand around a pain. She did not say his name. She was learning. The bells changed tempo, as if someone had told them a new story. At a shack that had once been painted blue, and now was mostly the idea of blue, with a little pier bolted to the bank like a piece of a table jutting from a wall, Sandor halted. An old man sat on the pier's edge, feet in a dinghy, mending a neat, clean net with a bone needle. The old man looked up and did not look surprised to see two cloaked figures at his door in the night. He had the face of someone who had seen too many times to be making a portrait of this one. "No passage," he said before his eyes had finished counting them. "No ferries now. I'm not rowing a soul with that in the water." He jerked his chin toward the green light downriver. "You see the color of it? That's the stranger's piss." Sandor snorted without humor. The stranger's on his own tether. He slid a hand into his belt and brought out a little twist of cloth. He unrolled it and showed silver. The old man regarded the gleam as a doctor might regard a rash he had seen in babies and kings. "Upstream is deer," he said. "We're not going across," Sandor replied. "We're going along. You take us half a mile by water, then put us on ground where there's no gold cloak with a lamp to count our teeth. You keep your boat. You keep your silver. You keep your breath. You will have to forget us, though." The old man spat into the river. It made a small, perfect sound. "Forgetting is cheap," he said, and rose with the deliberation of someone whose bones had earned the right to protest. "Horses, too. Boats not made for horses. Neither is a gate built for liars." Sandor lifted his chin at the little pier. "There's a path goes round the tanner's pit and through the eel sheds. We'll meet you where the reeds start eating the bank. If you're there, we cross. If you're not there, I say your name to a gold cloak and tell him you keep a priest's ledger of who comes and goes. And I tell him there was a red-headed girl with you. Damned her." The old man considered the river as if in it lay all the words men have abused. "I know no priest," he said, "and I know no girls. Take that silver out of my sight. I'll be where the reeds eat the bank." Sandor nodded. They moved again. Sansa felt the blood beat in her hands. When they came to the reeds, they were very tall and made a sound like a great beast breathing in its sleep. Stranger disliked them. He showed his teeth to the dark in a grin that did not require happiness. Sandor soothed him with a hand that had soothed no one and nothing else Sansa could imagine. He did not speak to the horse as women spoke to kittens. He told him facts. And the stallion, being a creature of facts, accepted them grudgingly. The mare watched and learned. The old man came down the bank in his boat, oars dipping without splash. His gray hair seemed to have soaked up what little light there was. He did not look up, He handled his craft and its silence with the attention he might have once given a woman whose smile he was afraid of frightening. He nosed the dinghy in among the reeds where the mud was black and the smell was like the inside of a lung. "Quick," he said, "and don't put your hands where the water can bite them. She has teeth tonight." Sandor lifted Sansa by the waist and set her in the boat's belly. The old man did not look directly at her. Sandor followed, the boat listing under his weight, and then straightening with a little noise of complaint. He took the mare's rein and coiled it in his fist. The horse balked and then, meeting his gaze, relented and waded into the mud to her fetlocks, like a lady stepping into bathwater she suspected of mischief. Stranger was compelled by look alone. He did not wade. He allowed himself to be obeyed. The old man set his oars and pulled. The river lifted and set them as if tasting. The city fell away behind reeds, and the line of roofs like teeth. Cries were distant now, and of a different pitch, as if they had traveled through wool. Once the old man looked to his left, toward the far bank where little fires were beating themselves along the shore like stitches, and Sansa saw the profile of his nose against the dark and thought of the men who had been kind to her in Winterfell. Mikken, who had always set the coals just so beneath the pot when her fingers were near. Kind men were not necessarily beautiful. They had careful hands. The boat slid through. In the middle stretch, there was a sound like the river sucking its teeth, and the old man murmured, almost to the water, almost to himself. Sansa did not speak. Sandor's thigh was warm against her knee. The city became an animal now that she was not in it. It lay along the bank and breathed smoke and spoke in its sleep. She did not forgive it, and she did not hate it. She did not know what to call what she felt for it. It was big, and it would remain big whether she named it or no. They landed where the bank sloped, and a stand of spindly willows held up the sky with their thin hands. Sandor stepped into the mud and turned to lift her as if she were a sack of meal, carefully so it would not burst. The old man did not hold out his hand for the silver. Sandor made as if to give it to him anyway. The old man shook his head. "You keep it," he said. "You may need to remember you have something worth weighing when you've listed all the rest and thrown it overboard." Sandor stared at him a moment, then rolled the coins back in their twist and made them vanish. "If anyone asks," he said. "No one's asked me a thing that mattered in a great many years," the old man replied, and pushed off and vanished like an old seal into his element. They stood on ground that had not seen many feet. The willows made a sound like women whispering together. The sky had begun that paling at its very blade's edge, that announces dawn not by light but by thinning. Overhead, a wedge of birds passed without comment. "We go now," Sandor said, not searching for her agreement because what was the use? He led the horses through a line of brush, with burrs, stubborn as small oaths. Sansa pulled her cloak tight and bent her head. Burrs clung, and then, offended by the cloth, chose to cling to one another instead. They put the city behind them not by distance, but by the way the air changed. The King's Road, when they met it at last, by way of paths that were not roads and tracks, that had not been made by men thinking of other men, lay like an old scar across the country's back, pale and proud and uninterested in their story. Sandor did not take it. He paralleled it and arrows flight to the east, moving through copses and along the edges of little fields where low stone walls kept nothing out but a man's right to stride. Once, a fox crossed before them, tail high, and Sansa felt a bolt of joy so clean it hurt. It was not a song kind of joy. It was the joy of there being things that did not belong to kings. Day came in gray, then silver, then pale yellow, as if the world were a coin being warmed in a palm. They stopped in a stand of birch where last year's leaves made a litter like old paper. Sandor tethered the horses. He set his big hands on his hips and breathed in and out a long time, like a smith letting his chest cool. Sansa sank to her haunches, then to her knees, then to the damp ground because she could not remember why anyone would want to be taller than grass. The sound of the bells had still not left the bones of her skull. It was softer now, an echo underthought. But it was there. "What now?" she asked at last, when the question became a stone too heavy to hold in her mouth. "Now we drink," Sandor said, and went to find water. When he came back, he brought a skin that had sweated from a stream and fingers smelling of green. He squatted and offered it to her. She drank, and it was like beginning again at something she had neglected. It was so good it frightened her. She wanted to drink the whole thing and become water. "Slow," he said, and she obeyed. Numbers came back to her. The first sips, and the third, and the sixth. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand as she had done when she was small and had raced Arya to the trough. "He ate," he added, and from his saddlebag came a heel of bread too honest to be soft and a strip of dried meat that had been salted with a man's thought for his own hunger. They ate with their heads down, the way beasts eat when they do not want to make a song of it. Crumbs stuck to Sansa's lip and she licked them away and was embarrassed by nothing. When the food turned into strength and climbed back into her muscles by way of her blood, she stood and looked through the trees. The world was larger than the city. The city had made itself large by shouting. The world was large by being. "Which way is north?" she asked, and then felt foolish, because the road was an old story she had heard as a child and could not forget. Sandor lifted his chin toward the distance, toward a sky, paler and emptier. "That way is where it gets colder, and men allow their words the mercy of silence. But we won't go that way yet. Not straight. We'll cut west to keep away from lions sniffing along the road and from idiots with antlers on their coin. Up through the woods till the river's fat again. There are bridges. There are fords. There are men who claim to own both like thieves who have written a poem about why your purse was better in their hand. We'll let the world forget you were here, and then we'll show it your back." At that, she looked at him fully, perhaps for the first time. His scarred face did not grow less or more terrible in daylight. It was a country with a bad history. It could still bear wheat. There was something in the way he stood slightly angled to the light that told her the fear fire had put in him was not a timid fear but the ferocity of a burned field toward spark. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. He chewed the last of the bread and swallowed without the help of water. "Because I hate them," he said. "Because I'm tired. Because you said snow with your mouth like a woman remembering milk. Because I keep my oaths to myself if to no one else. Pick one. Two, none. We're moving when the horses have finished telling their legs. They moved. Morning turned to day and day to a kind of warm light that had not had a chance to harden into afternoon by the time they heard voices up ahead. Sandor raised a hand, and it was like watching a boulder tell birds to stop singing. The birds stopped. He dismounted and tethered Stranger with a twist of rope to a sapling that would have pleaded if it could. He moved forward on the balls of his feet. Sansa followed, because to stay alone with the horses was to have her thoughts all at once and unmediated. The voices belonged to two men and a boy. They were standing by a cart whose wheel had sunk to its belly in a patch of ground that had been fine for walking and treacherous for weight. The men wore the remnants of livery under road dust. One had a leather jack. The other, a quilted gambeson, with the stuffing trying to take leave. The boy had an honesty that had nowhere to go. They had a cow in a rope halter that had eaten enough of the grasses to be irritated by them. The older man had a stick, and then the stick had a voice, and then the voice turned to curses. Sandor watched, still. He could have intervened. It was clear in him. He did not. He retreated a step, and then two. Sansa read his thought and was ashamed of her relief and her shame and her need to be relieved. They took a deer track that skirted a copse where flies made glitter out of sun, and a little stream did its work without impatience. Sansa found herself seeing small things more truly than she had ever seen big ones. The orange on a butterfly's wing was more precise than a crown. The ants moving along a stick made a pattern more honest than a courtier's bow. She thought briefly of Joffrey's mouth when he smiled and the way his eyes did not join it. She felt no heat in her chest. She felt only a kind of coolness that was not forgiveness. Perhaps it was an older thing. Perhaps it was the iron of Winterfell coming to sit in her bones and tell them the news. You have been away. You have learned. Now you will do the rest of your learning standing up. When they rested again, it was in the lee of a hill that had collected fallen leaves and kept them as a miser keeps nails, for the day when they will be the exact thing needed. Sandor gave her the knife with the edge his hand trusted and showed her how to scrape the burrs from her cloak by dragging steel backward along the grain of the cloth. She did it, and the sound became a task, and the task became a relief. He watched without the hunger of a man teaching a child to please him. He watched as a man who had only so many words for use, and had spent some already. "How far is River Run?" she asked when a cloud covered the sun and took the complicated glitter out of the slope like a hand cupped over a jewel. "You're thinking of fish," he said. "You think you'll swim there?" He spat. "It's far enough that you'll be a different girl when you reach it. It's near enough that every fool who wants to stop us thinks he can. We'll go near, touch the water, feel how it pulls. If that's where your mother is, it's a fortress, and fortresses draw men who want to be seen throwing stones. Your face is worth a castle to the wrong man. Will be a road's width from what you want, and you'll have to walk it later, with your wits dressed for it." She nodded, even though the ache in her chest flared at the thought of her mother so close, and the idea of not throwing herself forward like a child at the sight of a known hearth. The ache was not her master. Her feet were her masters. She thought of singing and did not sing. The first night in the woods they made no fire. Sandor's fear of flame was not the only reason. Light in a dark place is a shout. They ate in the manner of animals without barns. Jerky softened in water. The last of the bread, small hard apples they found beneath a tree and blessed with their teeth. Sansa found a pocket where the world was wide and inside it. Sleep. She curled on the cloak and listened to the absence of bells. It had weight as great as their noise had had. She would have thought it would be easier here. Instead, it was true. Truth requires strength even when it is gentle. She woke in the middle of the night to the sound of stranger moving his weight from one leg to another. Sandor sat awake with his back to a tree, eyes open. She did not know whether he had slept at all. A piece of moon had found its way through the leaves and laid its cold thumb along his scar and made it silver. He did not look at her. He was guarding, and guards do not share, even with the guarded. "What are you remembering?" she asked, surprised by her own voice. He did not start. "A lad," he said after a time. "With a little wooden knight his brother gave him to keep him from crying. He burned it in the brazier. Smelled of pitch and paint and pork. He fell asleep." The lad. "That's the trick of it. You fall asleep smelling something sweet and wake up in a different shape." His father told him not to make a noise while men were in the hall. He made a noise anyway. His brother brought him out of the fire by his neck. He learned not to cry. He learned later to drink. He breathed out. That's the story. Songs never want to sing it. They take the blood and make flowers. Flowers don't help you when the flame gets at your face. Sansa lay very still, as if not to scare something that had edged out of the trees to drink. "I won't sing," she said. "Not about that." "Good." He closed his eyes, not in sleep, but in the way of a man aligning himself with the place he sits. "Sleep. We move at dawn." She did. Dawn was not an event. It was a practice the world kept up until men believed in it. The second day's walking found them a shallow creek to follow. Its bed all flat stone the color of old teeth. Sandor showed her where to step so she would not turn her ankle. He did not touch her. The showing was a tilt of chin, a murmured, "There," a thumb's point, a sigh when she placed her foot right. She began to understand the language of it, as she had once as a child begun to understand the language of stitches. How the thread wants to lie, how the fabric confesses if you pull too hard. Her feet hurt less than her pride had in King's Landing. Pain with use is different from pain with humiliation. She preferred the former. By afternoon, voices wove through the trees again, this time more than two, and rougher. Laughter made of pebbles in a bucket. A smell of horse and old fried fat. Sandor's jaw went to iron. He drew her down behind a fallen trunk, furred with moss, and let her look past his shoulder. In a little clearing, 3 men had spread their gear in a way that said this was not a camp, but a way station. They were not soldiers. They were dressed in the patchwork ordinary of men whose livery came from their own boldness. One had a spear with a head too fine for his hands. The other had a bow untreated for weather, its string past its prime, but his eyes moved with a watchfulness that did not match his shabby kit. The third, whose stomach had done too much of his thinking, wore a man's smile over a weasel's mind. Sandor breathed through his nose once, a sound like a man tasting wine to see if it's turned. He looked at Sansa narrowly, measuring. "I can make you a mother with a cold," he said. "You can make yourself my silence. Keep your face down, and if anyone looks at it too long, cough and spit." "I can spit," she said, and found a thread of grimness in herself. She took hold of it and wrapped it once around her wrist. He stood first and stepped into the clearing as if from nowhere. He did not have his sword out. His hand was nowhere near it. He was tall, and the men stood because tall is a kind of weapon that needs regard. "Road," Sandor said, as though a different man had asked the question, as though he had no part in it but to pass it along. "Which one?" the weasel-minded man said, and grinned. His teeth had argued with a lifetime of cheap knives. "The one that gets us to the mill with the lady and the dog," Sandor replied. It sounded like nonsense. Sansa held her cough in her mouth until it had a weight. The bowman's eyes flicked to her and away, the way a man takes in a hawk and pretends he has only seen a crow. "Mills burned," the spearman said. "Lady took her dog and ran, like as not, into the river. Rivers are hungry this year." "Everything's hungry this year," Sandor answered. He scratched his chin the way a man does who would rather be drinking. "If the mill's gone, what remains?" "Road to Duskendale's blocked," the bowman reported without invitation, his tone like the reporting of weather. "Road to Rosby's crawling. You go east or west, you run into men arguing about where their lords have gone and how much they owe them for it. You go north, you run into ghosts. That's what they say. You go south, you run into lions with prettier clothes." "Benawande," Sandor grunted. "I've had my fill of pretty." He tilted his head at Sansa. She coughed then miserably, and ducked, and made a show of rummaging in the cloak as if for a rag. "Woman's got the fever," he said, and it cost him nothing to sound bored. The weasel smirked. "You know what cures a fever? Steel through the throat." Sandor returned. His smile was there and then gone, like a cut. The weasel did not smirk again. "Take the path that smells least like men," the bowman offered after a moment. "West and a little north, keep the river on your left ear. You'll come to a stand of oaks that forgot how to grow straight. After that, you'll hear the water twisting itself into ropes. There's a ford of sorts. You can walk it if your horse doesn't talk you out of it. On the far bank, keep the sun on the side of your face you don't shave." He glanced at Sandor's scar without staring. "Unless you shave both. Then keep it on your worst memories. There's a track. It won't look like one, but it is one." "Bendawa," Sandor nodded. "And you will still be here," the bowman said, arguing with hunger about who owes who. Sandor moved on, and Sansa with him, and they bled into the trees. Only when they had gone far enough for the laughter to sound like something remembered did she release her held breath. "You didn't draw on them," she said. "They didn't draw on me," he said. "Men who want to live talk a certain way. You learn it, or the world teaches it to you by the ear." They found the oaks that had forgotten about straightness and the water that made rope noises. The ford was less a ford than a place where the river had been argued into quiet for 10 yards. Stranger planted his legs and blew through his nose, and then accepted the compromise with a mutter. The mare followed, placing her hooves like a lady negotiating steps in a new gown. Water rose to Sansa's ankles and made everything a little cleaner. On the far bank, the track the bowman had promised was a line of nettles that had stood down for men and then gotten up again. They pressed through, itching and grateful. In the evenings, when they allowed themselves the luxury of whispering, they told each other truths that belonged to no one else. Sansa told him how the queen's words were like blades wrapped in silk and how softness could insult more surely than a slap. She told him about the boy who was king and the way he stared at suffering as if it were a mirror. She tried to be fair. Fairness was a habit she kept from her father, like a ribbon she wore under her dress where no one would see. Sandor told her about men who left their posts when the green light leaped and how their voices rose in him like bile. He spoke of wine as if it were a friend whose faults were beloved because they were constant. Once, stumbling over a root in the dark, he swore. And the word he used was so old and so precise, It made her cheeks warm, not with shock, but with the feeling of having learned a word she had been ready for. On the fourth day, a thin rain began that was less rain than a persistence of wet. It slanted through the trees and touched their necks with small hearts. The world smelled like a new loaf, torn open. They moved through it, and it beaded on the horses' manes and decorated strangers' eyelashes until he shook his head and flung bits of silver at the ground. Sansa's cloak grew heavier. Everything did. Weight has its own honesty. When they stopped, Sandor showed her how to pull the cloak so it shed rather than drank. He cut a piece of oiled cloth into two and gave her one to wrap her hair when they slept. She took it and tucked it, and his gaze glanced off her like a thrown pebble off a pond's skin. They were learning a decency that owed nothing to court. The rain brought tracks into relief. It showed where men had gone and where they had pretended not to go. On the sixth morning, before the light had learned to be confident of itself, they saw riders on the road proper, red cloaks under rain, moving in a little pack like meat on a spit. The two of them crouched low in a ditch lined with ferns that did not yet know it was summer. The riders passed without turning their heads because the rain gave them the right to be arrogant. One carried a pennon with a lion's head on it, made dull by wet. Sansa watched their hooves and felt an old panic stir like a hare. She took hold of it and set it on her lap until it stopped. She said to it, "I see you. We will not run into the jaw that's open for us." It twitched once and then lay down. That afternoon they came on a farmhouse that had learned first to be quiet, then to be empty. The door hung. The yard had the look of people who have left too quickly to take their habits with them. Sandor tied the horses and moved through the rooms with his sword in his hand and the expression of a man looking for a dog he loves and expects at any moment to find dead. He found no dog. He found a half sack of oats too damp to mill, and a jar of fat gone rancid, and a bedstead that had been hacked up for firewood. He looked at the hearth and then at the window and set his jaw. "We'll stay," he said. "No fire. Roof sound. I want you out of the rain even if I have to wring it from your hair myself." "No." She smiled then before she could stop herself, not in mockery. He scowled. He found a pile of rags and shook them, and found no mice and shook them again until dust rose. He cast them into a corner and told her to pile them for a bed. He took his cloak off and wrung it, and the water came out stained, as if the city were still in it. In the quiet, with the rain hemming in the world like a curtain, the weight of everything came and sat around them. Sansa took out her needle and thread because her hands needed to be employed to keep her head from becoming a hive. She mended the tear she had made in the cloak by snagging it on the thorn bush at the postern gate. The thread went through stubborn and then obedient. She felt her father's hand on her shoulder the way she had felt it once at the long table, steady and warm and asking nothing but decency from her. She nodded to the memory and stitched. "Tell me of Winterfell," Sandor said suddenly, as if daring himself to invite a song into a room where he would not permit one. "Tell me in the words you have that don't rhyme." She looked up. The rain made streaks on the window that divided the world into pieces she did not have to count. It was gray, she said, but not the gray of old bones. The gray of stone that has spent itself learning how to hold warmth and then learning how to release it without complaint. The walls were thick enough to make the wind a story you listened to, rather than a hand that shook you. In winter, the hot water ran under the floors like a creature you were grateful to and forgot to thank. The godswood smelled of soil that had not been cut open and meddled with. The heart tree watched. Sometimes the ravens turned the snow black with their wings when they rose. We baked bread with caraway. My mother's ring made a small, perfect sound when it tapped against a cup. Everything had names that were not meant to make other men feel they must kneel. The dogs belonged to people, and the people to one another. Then he was silent for a moment. The scar pulled at the corner of his mouth in the way it did when he was trying not to let his face show he had heard something. "And yet you left," he said, not unkindly. Not as an accusation, but as if he were turning a knife to see where it had been sharpened. "We came south to be loyal," she said. The words were so old and so stupid and still so true that they sat between them like a child. "We came for honor and truth. We found something different that used their names. We were not clever enough to see the trick, or we were too honorable to look for it. He huffed. Honorable people are always hoping to find other honorable people so they can die with them. He leaned his head back against the wall. Rain ran down outside as if someone combed the world's hair. You'll see your gray again if you live long enough to find the way that avoids all the men who want your name. That's what I can promise. Not Winterfell. The road. She tucked her needle into cloth and tied the end of the thread with a small firm knot. That is more than anyone has promised me in a long time, she said quietly. They were not alone forever. The world will not permit two people to make their own country without sending it tax collectors. On the 9th day, turning a bend in a deep lane where hedges made a tunnel and the earth smelled of new roots, they met 3 riders coming the other way at a walk that thought a lot of itself. Their cloaks were not red. They were an indeterminate brown that had learned to hide stains. One wore a badge in the shape of a stag's head. One wore no badge at all. One wore a woman's smile and a man's hands. "Good day," the badge said, as if he were the proprietor of all good days in the region. His gaze ticked over Sansa and moved on as if from habit. "What have we here?" "2 fools," Sandor said. "One too sick to talk much. The other with a horse with more sense than he's got." He did not put his hand to his sword. He let the reins slacken and the leaves drip and the horses shift their weight. He let the men make of his calm what they liked. "Roads closed ahead," the woman's smile said. "Easier to call him that than to grant him a name. Names give men purchase. Blood took the bridge. But there's a man with a boat and a mind for coin. If you want to leave with more than your skin, I suggest you consider his rate generous, even if your stomach don't." "We'll see," Sandor grunted. "You will," the badge said. "We're kind men warning fools. You could thank us." Sandor showed his teeth without humor. "Thank you." They passed one another, with a narrow scrape horses make, when they are too polite to bite. Sansa felt the woman's smile's gaze, like a snail's trail along her collarbone. She coughed. It was not feigned. Her throat had taken damp. The cough came and left a taste like iron filings. Sandor's hand tightened on the rein and then released. The man with the boat did indeed exist, and his rate was the rate of a man who knows that the weather, not he, has closed a bridge. Sandor paid him in a way that made clear that the coin was less valuable than the silence that went with it. They crossed, and the crossing took them into a region where the trees grew farther apart and the sky tried a larger voice. The river widened and changed its smell. Sansa thought of River Run, of her mother, and did not mention either. It settled between her shoulder blades, a weight she could carry. On the 12th day, toward evening, they came upon a band of men in gray and brown with a banner that had once been bright, but now was only a suggestion of color. They were laughing. Laughter in the woods is different from laughter in a hall. It has the same sound, but the context changes it. Sandor stiffened so that his mail shirt, worn under the jack for preference in this wet, rasped against cloth. Sansa felt strangers' alertness come up through the stallion's withers like the raising of hackles. From among the men stepped a tall one with a face like a wedge and eyes that counted quickly and never forgot the sum. Behind him, a septon with a broken smile and an unbroken gaze watched as if watching were a sacrament. "Well met," the wedge-faced man said, spreading his hands. "Is it?" Sandor replied. "In these parts, we don't take the measure of a meeting until it's done," the man said. "But that looks like a fine horse under you, friend. And the lady's mount is a dear little thing. Sometimes we find dear little things require guarding. Sometimes we find men don't like to travel with too much coin making their purses heavy. It fatigues them." "Bambi, eh?" Sandor said. "Coin is a burden. Words are a greater one. Why don't you put yours down and we'll pass?" The septon's smile thickened, which was an achievement, as it had little flesh to work with. "We are the Brotherhood," he said gently. "Without banners. We take no coin. We take justice where we can find it. What we ask for is not money. We ask where you come from and where you go, because the answer may help us help another, or it may help us decide whether to part you from those fine horses so you don't have to suffer their vanity." "Bendabawanin." Sandor's mouth bent. I know your kind, he said. You make pretty names for your stealing. You say God words and then cut throats and sleep better. I don't sleep. I don't cut unless a man asks for the blade. You'll find that if you ask me enough, Sandor Clegane, the wedge-faced man said, as if tasting something he had been served too late. Well now, the hound without his master. And the lady? We do not often see ladies travel with dogs unless the dog is well trained. His eyes came to Sansa's face and stayed. Pull down your scarf. Sansa felt the world narrow until it was only the distance between his eyes and her breath. Sandor moved stranger half a step, so that the horse's chest was suddenly between her and the man's gaze. A wall of living heat. Tell your men to keep their fingers off their bowstrings, Sandor said, and his voice was not a growl. It was a rock slide beginning to consider itself. And tell your holy man to find his god in a tree and leave passing travelers to their own worship. The wedge-faced man considered him, and behind his eyes a small war took place between curiosity and wisdom. The Septon's gaze did not waver, but his mouth, which had adapted to many kinds of pain with the cheerfulness of a man who has seen worse every day, softened. Let them go, Tom, he said to the wedge-faced man. That horse is trouble with a mane, and the man's worse. Tom sighed, a man whose sighs had been mistaken for surrender by fools who later learned the difference. Go then, he said to Sandor, and take your fever with you. But hear this. There are fewer safe roads than there were yesterday. Some men who wore red and some who wore blue have put on rags and decided to make up their own colors. They're not so friendly as we are. When the road forks and one way smells like cooking meat and the other like a latrine, take the latrine. I always do, Sandor said. He flicked his rein and stranger moved. Sansa's mare followed. The Brotherhood watched them go, and Sansa felt their looks on her like burrs that did not quite catch. When they had gone a little way, Sandor spoke without turning his head. They'd have sold your face to the highest joyless bidder if they'd known the song that sung about it. They didn't, she said. He grunted. They did not, he agreed. Sometimes the world is in the mood to favor fools. We'll keep playing fools until it doesn't. They slept that night under a thorn tree that had not yet decided whether to let spring touch it. The stars made no promises. Sansa lay awake and watched Sandor's silhouette against the jagged branches and felt the road choose them again and again, anew with each of her breaths. In the mornings now she washed her face in cold water and did not cry out. She braided her hair tight under the scarf until it ceased to be a distraction and became part of the shape her head made in the world. She walked with a step that did not wait to be told. The land rose here and fell there, and she began to see how it did so, not by accident, but by long habit. Villages appeared sometimes, clinging to hills like barnacles. Women watched them from doorways with their hands on hips and eyes, ready to accuse if accusation bought a margin of safety for their babes. Men watched too with the caution of creatures who had had their warnings ignored. Sansa gave them all nothing. She gave them the face of a girl with a cough and a man to mind her, and she passed. Near to where a bend in the river had been taught to behave by a line of stones driven in by men whose arms must have ached for weeks, they found a small sept half hidden in hazel. It had been burned once. The roof had been repaired without skill. The smell of smoke lingered as a surname. Sansa slipped inside while Sandor watered the horses meagerly from his skin. Within, a single seven-pointed star hung skewed on the far wall, formed of twigs bound with twine. Someone had placed a strip of blue cloth before it. No seat, no candle, just cloth. Sansa stood and let her body remember how to stand in a sacred place. She did not kneel. She did not ask for anything specific. She let the gods consider her as she had been, as she was, as she thought she might be. It was a relief to be looked at and not appraised. When she came out, Sandor had his head bent over stranger's leg, picking a stone out of the horse's hoof with a knife blade, delicate as a midwife. He did not look up. You prayed for something, he said, and it was not a question. I prayed to be the kind of person who could live with what I do, she said. And for my mother. He made a noise that was neither assent nor mockery. That'll do. The day they finally saw the gold glint of Riverrun's far banners, small as thistle flowers on the horizon, the sky was clean and hard, as if it had been washed in a bucket until it squeaked. Sansa's breath went shallow. She did not push her horse forward. Sandor's head turned slightly, measuring the wind, the angle of the land, the likelihood blue-cloaked men would be posted where the road narrowed. He led them not toward the castle but away again, skirting a shepherd's hill where little white drops of sheep moved like drift. Sansa swallowed. The taste in her mouth was complicated. "Not yet," Sandor said, and there was no triumph in his voice, only the rehearsal of a promise he had made himself. "You want to walk in under that fish and name yourself, you'll do it when we can walk out again if we have to." "My mother," Sansa began, and then stopped. "My mother would want the same," she said. Saying it built a bridge between the ache and the sense. She crossed. They took a farmer's cart road that looped like a piece of string dropped and stepped on. It led them into a fold in the land where willows made a roof, and the ground was soft enough to take the print of a thing and remember it. Here Sandor called a halt. He stood a while with his hand on Stranger's neck, looking not at Sansa but at the future in the trees. "We camp and wait," he said. 2 days. We watch who goes in and who goes out. We see if there are more lions than fish near the gate. We see if ravens fly with ribbons on their legs, and whether they head west or north. You'll go to your river run when the road is under your feet and not under some other bastard's eyes. Menamawa. She nodded, a little stiffly. He saw and shrugged as if to say he accepted the weight of her desire, the way he accepted rain. He took off his cloak and laid it over a log to dry even though it would not. He rubbed down the horses with handfuls of grass. He built no fire. He shared his meat with her and chewed as if each bite were the head of a man he disapproved of. In the night, a fox barked. In the morning, a woman's song rose faintly from the river, a washing song with no words, sung to the rhythm of beating cloth. Sansa stood among the willows and felt something inside her align with the day. She had been a bird in a cage, taken out to sing when the men in the hall were drunk enough to enjoy their own sadness. She had watched herself. She had thought that grace was something done to you by a room. Now she found it could be something you made with your feet and your hands and your breath. She touched the bark of the willow and thanked it for being there. It did not require thanks. It stood. On the second afternoon, they saw a column of men on foot, moving toward the castle, hobbling along like a centipede missing legs. Their clothes were a poem about misfortune. A wagon rolled among them with its axles singing misery. At its side, a girl of about Sansa's age walked with her hair braided with string and her eyes on the dust. Sansa watched them pass and felt a heat in her cheeks that did not belong to shame or anger alone. It belonged to the knowledge that she could step out now, call to them, put her face into the world, and see what the world would try to do to it. She did not. She put a hand to her throat where the scarf lay. "You'll have your turn," Sandor said, not unkindly. When the sun laid itself along the ridge like a tired dog, a small party of horsemen appeared on the north road, moving with the economy of men whose horses must be spared. At their head rode a woman with a back like a spear. Even from this distance, Sansa knew that back. Bodies have their own faces. She took one step forward without meaning to. One step that was everything she had been and hoped to be. Sandor's hand came up, not touching. But there, a wall built of intention. The woman turned her head briefly, as if scenting rain. Then she rode on. Sansa stood very still and let the ache of it pass through her, like the river had passed through her boots back at the ford, taking away some warmth, leaving behind a kind of clean cruelty. She breathed once, twice. The third breath arranged the bones of her face again. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow. Tomorrow." Sandor allowed. "Unless tomorrow belongs to other men." They took the last of the day and made of it a meal of bread, gone soft with damp, and a handful of berries Sansa had found and offered, one by one, to the fact of their hunger. The sky deepened. The first star revealed itself in the way stars always do, by waiting for men to notice their failure to look. Sansa lay and closed her eyes. The bells were long gone, but sometimes she heard them anyway, folded and quiet and turned into resolve. In her sleep, she walked the halls of Winterfell and did not get lost. The hot water under the floors was doing its work. In the Godswood, the heart tree looked at her with the same red eyes and did not require an apology from her for surviving. When dawn came, she rose without being called. Sandor was already up, his back turned, his shoulders telling her with their set that whatever today demanded, he would be the first to take it. She rolled the cloak, tied the scarf, checked the mare's feet as he had shown her, and found 2 burrs clinging to the hem. She pulled them off and set them on the log. They looked ridiculous and brave. "Ready?" he said. "Yes," she answered, and the word felt like shoes that had been broken in until they matched the feet that wore them. They moved through the willows and onto the cart track that would bring them, at a proper distance and then at a closer one, to the place where a daughter might become something more than a message. The river ran. The wind had no interest in kings. Birds made their treaties and kept or broke them without reference to sigils. Sandor spat and adjusted his grip on the rein. Sansa held herself upright in the saddle and thought of her mother's hand on the banister at Winterfell, steady, as if to steady the stone itself. They went, and the road took them, and neither asked forgiveness of the other. Okay. They had not gone far upon that cart track before the land did one of those small, unremarkable miracles. It keeps in reserve for people who have gone too long without permission to breathe. The hedges dropped their shoulders. The water took a slower tongue. The sky, instead of being something pressed down upon you like a heavy palm, made space above like a tent held up by good poles. Even the mare's ears seemed to listen differently, as if sound now brought stories instead of orders. They kept to the ruts where the cartwheels had taught mud to be patient, and let the late light find them and leave them without argument. When the turn came that would have brought them down a bare hillside and into the sightline of any man with a fish upon his breastplate who cared to be counting, Sandor halted them with a hand. He squinted into the distance the way a cat squints at a new shadow. Out there, the towers that guarded the confluence of rivers threw long bruises across the water. On their tiny crowns, banners stirred, blue and red and silver, the colors of men who believed that they had inherited the right to name the weather. The great wheel raised over the west gate turned slow, turning its buckets with the assurance of an old jaw chewing a tough story. In the shallows, geese made parentheses of themselves and discussed matters that would never appear in any chronicle. "Remember your breath," he said, as if reminding himself. She did. She took it in and counted, as Septa Mordane had once taught her to count stitches. Even, neat, unforgiving of carelessness. Inside the counting, the feeling that had attacked her when the spear-backed woman rode in yesterday settled into a different shape. Longing was still there, raw, red as the inside of a cut, but it sat now alongside something harder. She would not throw herself forward like a fish at a boy's net and call that love. Love had to be braver. They drew back under the trees and let the world go about its business without confessing to it that they were there. Sandor unsaddled the mare with movements that were precise and neither tender nor cruel. He let stranger keep his tack. Trust was an economy, and he hoarded it. He walked the perimeter of the little green shelf they had chosen, as if he were making the shape of a room with his body and telling the corners where to be. Sansa watched and learned where the ground would complain if stepped on, and where it would hold a secret without moralizing. A woman came along the river then, hips swaying under a wrapped skirt, a bundle of linen battering her thigh with its wet weight. She wore her hair folded and pinned with sticks. She had the look of someone who had done without a man's shadow long enough to be unimpressed by a new one. She went down to the stony lip and bent and began to beat the cloth upon rock, her song rising and falling with the fabric's slap. Not words, just the shape of effort made beautiful because there is nothing else to do with it. Sansa said, "That one." Low. Sandor followed her gaze and grunted. "Maybe. Women keep better counsel. They also sell it dearer. They'll sell it for the price of wheat one day and for the price of a kindness the next, and men never learn which day is which." Then we will pay with the right coin," Sansa answered, surprised at her own certainty, as if her voice were a knife that had discovered its edge while she had been watching something else. He cut a little circle with his hand. "Wait." They waited until the woman lifted the last of the cloth, wrung it so hard her forearms looked like two good ropes working. and slung the load up. She made to pass, her wet skirt darkening the path where it brushed. Sandor stepped out from the trees, not into her way, but near enough to it that she would see the option of stopping and know that the option of not stopping was real. "Good day," he said. He wore the voice of a man who was tired of being feared and too tired to be friendly. She eyed him as one eyes a dog, not unkindly, but with keen attention to teeth and the set of the ears. Her gaze slid to Sansa and tightened, not with alarm, but with the recognition women share when another woman is wearing endurance like a borrowed cloak. "Not much of it," she replied. "The day, I mean. You want river news? Give me a reason or bring your own bucket." "We want a mouth," Sandor answered. "To carry a small thing to a larger one, at her own pace and profit. To the fish castle." She smiled a little at that. "If you say its right name too loud, there are men who will hear even if they were not meant to. Fish are proud of their scales." Sansa came forward a step, the cloak still wrapped, the scarf still pulled. She unpinned the scarf just enough to let the woman see the auburn at her temples, and then pinned it again. Quick, like the admission of a secret already guessed. The woman did not start. She lowered the bundle to her hip and rested it there, and took Sansa in, as she would take in a calf she might buy, if the price were fair and the gait steady. "That hare will get you caught or saved," she said, "depending whose hand is on the catching, and depending whether the saving is a favor. I've seen girls with that hair and the way the day goes for them." Sansa held her gaze. "There's a lady in that castle with the same hair," she said. "I am her daughter." The woman did not blink that away either. She shifted the bundle to the ground again and pushed the pins from her hair and repinned them, not because her hair needed it, but because her thinking did. "There are ladies in that castle who have daughters. There are daughters who want to be ladies. There are men who lie better than both. And there is the matter of coin." Sandor produced no silver. He said, "You know the price of that news if it's wrong. It will be you, dressed in lies, being made to tell them again, until they take and take. But if it's right, and if it is received by the right ears, you will have done something that you will not forget when you are old." "Men?" The woman spat, because men always imagine old women will be comforted by saints and psalms. And women know they are comforted by bread, and by having done one right thing that keeps them from drowning in all the wrong things they did, because they were starving. "I have a name," she said. "But you'd waste it. Call me the washer. Give me the thing. If I am stopped, it will be washing. If I arrive, it will be washing. If I am asked too many questions, I will be a fool who does not keep track of names. And for once in their lives, men will believe a woman who says she does not know." "Bendan?" Sansa went to her trunk. Not a box, not a chest. Just a little roll of cloth she kept in her saddlebag with needle and thread, and a handful of buttons that were not worth much to anyone but would hold a dress together if a day came when you had to decide whether to run with your bodice undone. She sat on her heels upon the leaf litter with her knees together, as she had been taught, and threaded gray through the eye. She cut a square from the hem of her inner shift, where the frayed place would not show when she repaired it, and upon that little flag of undyed cloth she began, with small firm stitches, to make the shape of a wolf. She did not overdo it. This was not a thing that needed beauty. It needed a certain stubbornness in the angle of a snout, and the particularities of stark work, the way her mother had taught that the outlines must be strong enough to hold when a maid brushed a sleeve too hard, or a brother took a tunic off with rough hands, because he was lazy. She let the thread do as it wanted to do, and encouraged it when it flagged. When she finished, the wolf's head looked back over its own shoulder, the way the dire wolf on Lord Stark's banners had done in the courtyard in winter, when wind came from the wrong quarter and made the cloth pull. She rolled the patch in on itself and bound it with a twist of thread and placed it in the washer's palm. It looked like nothing there. The woman closed her fingers around it, and the line of her knuckles made a kind of promise all their own. "If there is word," Sansa said, keeping her voice level and too practical to be desperate, "tie a strip of blue on that post, by the bent willow." She pointed. "No name. No man will look twice at a bit of cloth where women do their work." "Then so." The woman nodded. buying the plan with the economy of someone who knows exactly how far a bit of cloth can carry a message. If the right eyes look where they always look anyway. She lifted her bundle again. If there is no word, she said, that will be a kind of word too. Wait 2 sunsets. Not 3. The river does not like people who pretend they have time. Man. She left them then, the wet fabric thudding her thigh. The song resuming, lower now and more private, as if she were already rehearsing what she would say to the castle gate, without saying anything at all. Sandor stood there a long moment, head cocked slightly as if listening to something behind the leaves. Then he grunted. We keep the watch, he said. We don't look at the post as if it were a crown. We breathe like we said we would. Waiting is work. It pulls on muscles you did not know were there. It asks you to hold your breath in a way that is not what you learned as a child, but a new way learned at a gallows distance from the ground. They ate little. They spoke less. When they did, it was in remarks that had the shape of maintenance, not philosophy. A boy passed at noon with eels in a basket. The basket's damp bottom darkening his trouser leg with a Rorschach blot of the river's idea of a man. In the mid-afternoon, a couple older than Rain walked hand in hand as if the world had always been generous. A line of 3 little carts with hoops for canvas went by empty, rattling and complaining and sniffing the air like dogs who have fallen out with their masters and pretend they never had any. The castle's wheel turned. The blue-red silver stirred like a fish flashing its side deep in water. Long after the angle of the light had become slant and delicate, when gnats began to think about becoming a cloud, and the world tucked its chin against the evening, the washer came back. She did not look around. She went to the post Sansa had named, and as if tying her bundle for her walk home, made a neat knot of strip upon strip. The cloth was blue. It would have been blue even if the world had gone colorblind. She did not hurry, and that made Sansa love her a little. Then the woman went on without turning her head, the wet hem writing on the earth. Sandor did not move until she was gone. Then he walked down, careful, as if the space between him and that post were a treacherous one men had told stories about. Sansa followed. Up close, the blue was old, the sort of blue that came from dye boiled when the last leaves were gathered before frost. There was nothing else. No note. No scrap of mother's writing folded into the cloth and pricked with pins. It did not need it. The strip itself had been hemmed in a way Sansa knew like the sound of her own heartbeat. A stranger's hem was a stranger's hand. Too much, too little. Stitches trying to be even because that looked respectable. Tully hems had a certain way with corners. This one had that way. It was enough. She was not prepared for the force with which the knowledge entered her. It went through her like cold. Through glass. And then like heat. Through wool. Her knees softened, not with the weakness she despised in herself, but with the relief she had not allowed herself to make a plan for. She put her palm to the post as if it were the banister at Winterfell. The wood was rough beneath the pad of her hand and got in under the skin a little. Good. She wanted that. What did we buy? Sandor asked, not trusting feelings, not trusting cloth, but, because he was not a fool, trusting the knowing that came into a person's face like light behind a curtain. Time, she said, and the word that my mother is near, and not too bound to send a rag to make a promise of it. Promises make men do dangerous things. He looked toward the castle, his scar pulling tight, making the memory of flame climb up his throat and retreat. We take what they send and we put our own name on it. That is, we keep our heads down 2 days more. Then we go and make the next small move that might get us killed. And he was right. They made camp again with the same economy, the same refusal to build a fire that would claim them. The night had the sort of cleanness that feels like judgment. When the fox barked, it sounded like laughter. Sansa slept for a time and woke in the dark with her heart beating too quickly and her breath trying to imitate it. Her body remembered bells even here. She sat up and folded her cloak tighter and listened to Sandor's breathing. It was not the breathing of a man drunk or a man dreaming. It had the steady in and out of someone who had decided to live and was annoyed by what that requires. Do you ever think? She asked the air. That names are the only thing that keep us fastened. If I had no name, I would drift. I think I would be reed work on a flood. Then I think of the names of the people I love. And they are stakes in the riverbed? He made a noise that might have been a cent if it had not been too tired for philosophy. Men who choose new names are the only ones I trust less than men who say their own too many times, he said. But a thing with no name kills you just as dead. Call yours and hold to it when men try to put steel through it, Sansa said into the dark. Sansa. It felt different now than in the halls of the Red Keep, where the saying of it had been the first step towards someone else picking it up and using it to cut her. Here was a tool in her own hand. Not a blade, a needle. She went on. Caitlin, Arya, Bran, Robb, Rickon, father. She paused. Mother, she said again, particle and prayer. Dawn came like a well-mannered guest, not banging on the door. They ate, such as the eating was, and moved, not toward the castle in a line to be counted, but along the river in a way that would make them look to anyone like people who live by water and had never heard of banners. Sandor showed her how to carry a net in the way men carry such things, so that a glance reads the story and does not ask a question. Stranger tolerated the charade with the disdain of a creature whose dignity is built on never pretending. The mare, who had probably been made to play many roles in her life, settled into it at once and made herself look like a fisher's horse by lowering her head and pretending to think simple things. They came upon a mud-spattered boy, sitting with his legs in the river, face set with the stubbornness of someone determined to catch a fish that would have escaped even if it had decided to come to land. He looked up, took in Sandor's height and Sansa's scarf and the put-on net, and narrowed his eyes into a little slit of cunning and hope. "You want a ferry?" he said before they had asked. "I'll take you under for the right coin. I know where the stakes are and where the rope is cut. No soldier sees us. We go as a duck goes. No ferry." Sandor replied easily, but maybe a question bought for a copper. "Who wears the watch at the South Meadow Gate?" The boy frowned. He had the names of gates as a boy has the names of trees, by their usefulness, not their heraldry. "The one with the rushes on its lip? That's a fish gate, sir. Fish and redfish. Little bit of green once, but not no more. Frey colors," Sansa said. "Low. Men with frogs on their shields too," the boy added, eager now that he saw silver of a sort glint behind Sandor's easy. "From the bog. They spit and laugh at the same time. You want to watch for them. They don't clean their boots proper. Frogs." Sandor grunted. "Crenogman. Good to know whose arrows aren't ours." The boy preened, pleased to be a man for a moment. "There's a woman up there cries when she thinks the men can't hear. Sounds like my mother did the night my little sister went. I don't think the men are more deaf for pretending, but maybe she cries for the river, and then it's different." "Mendao." Sansa put her hand in her pocket and felt the last of their honest copper. She passed it over without ceremony. "If you see a washer again," she said, with a hairpin made from 2 little sticks and a twist of blue cloth on her basket, "tell her the washing dried well. See what she says." He nodded solemnly and stuffed the coin in his mouth and bit it. Not because he had been taught to, but because he had seen men do it and liked the feeling of being like men. "I will." He went back to his fish. They went on. Toward noon, they found a stand of elder where the path had broken itself into little decisions and then made none of them. Sandor halted there and folded himself onto his heels and lifted his face to the leaves in a way that had nothing in common with prayer and everything in common with an animal taking in the wind. "Men to the south," he said. 2. Moving not to be seen by men to the north. She could hear nothing but the ordinary racket of summer, which in wartime is a mercy and a disguise. She did not argue. When Sandor rose and drew them off into a narrow green throat between 2 humps of ground, she followed without asking the maps wherefore. When the men came, they were red after all, not in their cloaks, which were muddy and sullen, but in the scalawag strip that had once been color and now was only a memory around a sleeve. They carried that loose, hungry swagger men get when they think they have more power than they have meals. Their hands were empty. Their eyes were not. Sandor pressed Sansa down behind a thorn and went still. The mare breathed through the veil of her own tail and made almost no sound. Stranger's breathing shortened to nothing. It was as if he had decided that air was a debt, and he would hold it rather than pay. The men passed. One spoke a joke about women that had not been funny the first time men made it, in the first stage, and had not grown better with repeating. Sansa looked at their boots and thought, I am not yours to frighten. It was not a thought she made for them. It was a thought she made for herself and let radiate outward until the space around her was occupied by it. The men walked on through it, ignorant. Good. They came at last to a bend in the river where the bank made a little natural amphitheater for washerwomen and boys with baskets, and the men who loved both more than they loved being shouted at by their captains. A flat stone like a little stage lay slanted at the water's lip. Beside it, a pole had been driven, and on that pole, a new strip of blue had been tied. Not the same strip as last night's, a wider one, and wet. The knot was the knot women use when they do not plan to come back to a thing before dusk. Sansa's chest did that breaking and mending all in the same breath. They did not rush it. Sandor scanned the tree line with the patience of a wolf, who is also tired of being a wolf. Only when he had covered the ground in long cool looks did he allow Sansa to step down. She went to the pole and untied the wet strip, as if taking down clothes from a line. The cloth smell rose. Smoke. A hint of lavender hammered into it too hard by someone impatient for kindness, and something else. The faint iron tang of old blood that comes from a woman who pricks her finger and hides it and goes on with her work. She turned the strip end over end in her hand. There, in one corner, hem-stitched with a particular quickness. Her mother's way of finishing when a servant was at the door asking for orders and she had not done wanting to make a thing neat. There was nothing written. There could not be. There was a seed of something hard caught in the hem. A sliver of pin bone. Not accident. A small token. The sort of talisman a girl would tuck in her bodice before a dance and forget until she undressed late. Laughing. It made no sense to any eye that did not know the mind that had put it there. It was sense enough. What does it say? Sandor asked, voice flat and functional. She is there. Sansa said simply, because more words would make it less true. And she can answer. He rubbed the heel of his hand against his jaw. So we make the move. We find a door not made for banners. The ones with banners open and shut in time with men's pride. We need the doors women use. The washer could take me to the outer, perhaps. The small gate by the river wheel. The women go in and out under count of linen, not heads. She could see the way of it rise up in her mind. Herself in an apron, hair scraped back and hidden the way peasant women did because beauty was not currency in that market, but a hazard. She knew how to carry a bucket. She had learned to carry worse. Sandor had the look of a man fitting a bridle on a bad thought. I don't like it, he said, but I like everything else less. If I go to the gate with you, every man with a memory will run his finger along it and feel the notch where my name lives. If I don't, I let you go where men can close a door between us. Then choose cruelty, she said, and surprised herself with the calm in it, which is the kind that hurts less, not the kind that hurts you less. He barked out a laugh so short it was nearer to a cough. You've a mouth like a small hard apple, he said. It doesn't look dangerous until teeth hit it. He stared at the water wheel, turning and turning. We do it near dusk. Water's loud then. Men want to go to their meat and stop counting. You stay close to women and into a shadow when you can. If there's a cry, you make a different cry and turn it into a quarrel among them. If there's a hand, you bite. If you find your mother, you tell her to send me a fish to follow. I'm not standing with my bare arse to the hedge while you two women decide what to say about honor. Endo. She smiled in spite of herself, and the smile had teeth too. I will tell her exactly that. They spent the afternoon in the business of looking like people one does not notice. Sansa fetched water in a pot that was not theirs and returned it, and the woman who owned it would not meet her eyes, but later put 3 berries in Sansa's palm when no one was watching. Sandor mended a strap, and 2 men came and watched him as men will watch a man doing something with leather when they are tired of watching one another idle. He gave them no chance to find him interesting. He let his scar be the story, and then made it boring by not letting it be. The washer came at last, not making a show of anything, face made into the blank weft of women's work. She set her basket down with the ordinary thud, bent, and when she rose, her hand brushed the hem of Sansa's cloak in the way women brush each other when children are near and a message needs to move without a man's eye naming it. "You reign in Carrie tonight," she said, as if to no one in particular. "You will be paid in slaps if you do it poorly. If you do it well, you will be paid having done it well." "I am a good washer," Sansa replied. And there was some truth in the joke, which made it safer to tell. Sandor did not look at either of them. His gaze had gone distant, the way it does in men who have sent something of themselves into the future to see if it can be lived through. "Where," he asked the air, "do I stand and not be seen? And also stand where I can make someone regret things if I must." "Where the reeds grow like a coward's hair," the washer said dryly. "Crouch under them and try to look like a pile of old nets. You're big, which helps. Men ignore piles of work." Dusk stretched itself out on the river like a cat. The wheel kept turning. At the lower edge of the outer works, where stone bit into water and water bit back, a small postern for the use of women and men who carry buckets was unbarred and barred again with the rhythm the washer had told them to expect. It was not that the guards were unwise. It was that the small doors had their own gods. Sansa bound her hair with the oiled cloth to make it flat, and over that tied a faded kerchief the color of last year's straw diwa. She let her scarf sit lower across her brow than she would in the street. She smeared a little ash from the bottom of their cookpot along her cheek and across her throat the way poor women get marked by the world and do not get around to washing it off before sunset. She pulled the cloak's hood forward and put her shoulders down, losing height that was not really hers and becoming the shape of a girl who has had many days like this and expects more. "Keep your feet," Sandor said. His hands were on the mare and not on her, but the words were fingers, brief and iron. "I will come back," she said. She had not promised anything like that since the yard at the Red Keep, when promises were made to keep other people calm. This one she made to keep herself from flying apart like straw when a wagon wheel hits a stone wrong. She went. The washing turned to a queue of women, each carrying weight, as if that weight were an old friend they did not quite forgive. They moved with the economy of people who have given up believing in ease and find dignity in efficiency. The washer stepped into the stream, and Sansa stepped where she had stepped, feeling the cold take her ankles, the little pull of current that said, "Careful, I am stronger than you think." She kept her eyes on the space between two women's shoulders and did not look at the towers. At the postern, a guard with a fish on his breast and boredom in his mouth watched them come. He did not count. He made the little gesture men make when they have been taught to be suspicious of everything and have learned that this is like trying to be suspicious of rain. The washer pushed her basket at Sansa's hip, and Sansa took it, bent under its insistence, and moved through the door into the cool shade of the outer passage. Sound changed. The river did not follow them properly. It put its hand to the door and peered but would not enter. Inside, the air held onto the rock smell of old stone and the softer smells of women's things. The washer's wet hem dragged, writing a sentence in little dark loops. Sansa walked in time with the others, not in the center where someone important would walk, not on the edge where someone unsure would walk. She kept herself small and became part of a river made of people for whom this was a day like any other, which was how one survives a day like no other. They went up a shallow step and into a low tunnel where water had once decided to go and then been persuaded not to. At the tunnel's end, a small yard opened, bounded by the inner wall like a bowl. Here, lines had been strung, and arms had been racked, and a great copper heated on a ring of stones. Steam rose with the smell of lye and old linen, and the faint sweet of lavender someone had been able to carry away from home at the last minute. Not many men were here. One boy with a broken tooth and the privilege of staring as long as he liked. A guard at a door who preferred to be imagining meat. An old man mending a bucket's iron hoop with the seriousness of a surgeon. Sansa put down the basket where the washer pointed and set herself to wringing a sleeve with such concentration she could have been wringing the neck of fear. The washer did not look at her again. She worked, as women work, when they are being watched by people who do not know how to see. The rhythm took Sansa into itself. Twist. Lift. Shake once. Hang. Twist. Lift. Shake once. Hang. The copper sang when fresh water hit its side. A woman cursed when a child knocked over her little pile of clothespins. With the wildness peculiar to children who have been made too quiet for too long, and must explode or perish. The yard had doors opening off it. One went to a passage where the floor was worn smooth by men's boots, another to a narrower way smudged by the passage of skirts. The guard at the men's door yawned and rubbed his belly. The boy with the tooth wandered, trying to be in someone's way, and denied that pleasure by women who had given birth and knew how to move in heavy rooms. She did not expect her mother to come out and take her hand. She expected nothing to make room for anything. Even so, when the inner door opened and a woman stepped into the steamlight with a basket, Sansa's heart did the old ridiculous trick it had been playing since she was 5, and a door in Winterfell had opened, and her mother had stood there with a smear of flour at her wrist. It was not Catelyn Stark. Of course it was not. It was a small, brisk woman with dark hair and a mouth that had been tired for 20 years. She spoke a woman's language to another, and for a while the world concerned itself with stains and the management of hot metal. But the door had opened, and in the crack as it shut, Sansa saw, at the far end of the corridor, a flash of blue and a slant of red on a sleeve, and above that the fall of auburn hair. No more than that. It could have been a trick of light. It could have been the river putting things in her head. It could have been everything else but her mother. It was enough. Not to make her run, to make her breathe more carefully. The work went on. The washer trusted her with a different piece, heavier, because women know how to test one another without making men think they are at war. Sansa passed. The guard scratched himself and made a private sign at a fly. As the sun went down, the yard took on that twilight quality common to kitchens and washeries and all rooms where women have made steam rise. It began to belong to the night's quiet endurance rather than the day's loud one. When the call came to take the clean in, it was not a call. It was a movement, hips shifting, baskets lifted, decisions made without ministers. The washer put her burden into Sansa's arms and did not touch her face, but put a look on it that felt like a hand. They went in the inner door and down the passage with the skirt smudges, and Sansa learned again how to walk while looking 3 places at once without appearing to look anywhere. On the third door on the left, a guard with a spear stood. He was a tired man and more honest for it. His beard had grown faster than his reasons. He let the women by because he had watched women carry burdens in and out of doors every day of his life, and had learned nothing to argue with the habit. Sansa passed within 2 feet of his spear and could have put her hand on it and bitten it, and the world would not have changed more than by a hair. She did not. Into a wider corridor then, cold underfoot with the stored chill of stone, and out onto a covered walk that looked over an inner yard where men were gathering to be told lies before their meat. Here, the washer slowed infinitesimally. Not enough for a man's eye. Just enough that the pace of their little procession shifted, and a new line overtook them, and the women shuffled. And in the shuffle, Sansa found herself at the back. A door opened to her right. A woman stepped out, talking low to someone behind her. Her hair was auburn gone, darker by torchlight. The hairpins were plain. Her sleeve brushed Sansa's sleeve. Her voice was her voice. "Put it there by the bench," she said to the air. "And be sure the linen comes back. That was marked. We have so little left that is truly ours." Sansa did not look up. She could not. If she did, she would shatter and be 1,000 needles on the floor for some fool to sweep up and throw away. She bent her head in that half-curtsy the poor make when it costs too much to bend all the way. She moved past, and the woman walked on, and the heat in Sansa's face was like brandy poured down her throat. The washer's hand, the one that had never touched her face, touched her elbow then. Once, a hard pinch. Not to hurt. To remind. Sansa breathed and let the breath settle in her belly, where it could be made into courage. She put her basket by the bench. The world went on. Men laughed about meat. Water hissed in a distant pot. A raven called. Serious and ridiculous both. They got out again because women do, because one must. They came down the passage with their empty baskets like a column of little ships against a tide. At the postern, the boy with the broken tooth had turned his attention to a beetle, and his mouth made the shapes boys' mouths make when they have found a private duel to narrate. The guard had grown no wiser and no kinder. The river took them back into its mouth and tested their ankles and allowed them to pass. Dusk, 5 minutes older, stood on the bank and shook out her skirts. Sandor waited under the reeds like a dangerous piece of driftwood. He rose up out of them, all angles and disdain, and the relief in his face was disguised as scorn because men like him are not permitted to show their real faces without being punished for it. "Well?" he said. Sansa had been ready to compose something steady and useful. Instead, she laughed. It was the softest sound, and it was not triumph. It was recognition. "She is there," she said. "She is there," she said again, because it needed saying twice to be a bridge stout enough to cross. "And she is herself." He let out a breath like a man putting down a log he has been carrying too long. "Good," he said. "Good." He looked down toward the path. "Bad next," he added. And she loved him a little for that honesty too. They did not go back to their willow patch. They went upriver a little, into a pocket where the bank jutted, and a stunted alder had learned to grow like humility. Sandor put his back against it and listened to the dark, and Sansa sat with her cloak wrapped and her hands clasped, not in prayer but in readiness. She could see, as if laid out on a small, neat table, the next ways and the ways after that. None of them were gentle. All had corners at which a man might stand who knew the price of a girl's hair and a mother's name. But for the first time, the thing ahead was not only danger, it was a task. "You'll go again," Sandor said at last, voice like a whetstone. "Not tomorrow. You go tomorrow, and men who are half awake will be made to notice because men love patterns, even when they are not clever enough to speak of them. Next day, you'll take something that needs a question with it. You'll put the question in your hands." "Menderouse. What question?" she asked. Though she knew. "The one about doors," he replied. "The door that is not a door. The hour when a woman with hair like yours will be allowed to pass through it and not be asked a man's questions." She nodded. "And you?" she asked. "I'll be the shadow that does not belong," he said. "I'll be where something violent can come from if men forget to mind their own boots. I'll be the consequence of someone else's mistake. That's the only thing I know how to be that is of any use to anyone." She could not argue with the truth. She did not try. Instead, she told him the small ordinary things she had noticed in the yard. The way the copper sang when cold water hit. The pin bone sewn into the hem. The cadence of the guard's sigh when a fly teased him. The worn spot on the threshold where many feet had turned right. The way the little boy's mouth shaped the beetle's battles with the seriousness of a poet. She told him these because details become ropes when there is a river to cross, and because she had learned, these last weeks, that even a man who despises songs can be steadied by the mathematics of a place. The night went deep. Somewhere, very far, a hound cried. Sandor's jaw worked, then eased. When sleep came to them, it did not come like a trap sprung, but like a blanket set down by a mother who has things to do, but will not let the draft fall upon her child's neck. The day between was business, practiced, and hard. Sansa mended a glove because mending is a way to rehearse putting the world back together when no one is looking. Sandor walked the ways. A man can walk around a castle without being counted, and came back with burrs in his breath and satisfaction disguised as irritation. "Frogs to the north," he said. "Fish to the gate. Men with straw in their hair along the east path who haven't decided who they belong to yet and will decide based on who feeds them first. The wheel turns and the men who keep it greased talk about the sky with the ocean's contempt. Your mother has people who move in and out without showing their faces. I didn't see them. That's how I know they exist." Sansa folded her mended glove and put it away as if it were treasure. She did not ask him whether he had missed being a dog. She knew the answer, and that it had nothing to do with kings. She asked him instead what he would do if there were fire. Go mad and then kill the fire, he said, as if describing any other habit a man has and is ashamed of. Try not to stand in it while I do. She nodded. I will say snow, she said, and that made him open his mouth and close it with a grit of teeth that might have been gratitude if it were not busy being fury. When dusk flexed its hand again, they went to the river's lip and found the washer there, as if she had grown from the reeds. She made no display of anything. She put a small folded thing into Sansa's palm while looking at Sandor with the untroubled insolence women wear when dealing with big men around water. Sansa did not open the fold at once. She held it and knew by the weight that there was almost nothing there. Almost nothing has toppled kingdoms. She opened it when the washer had moved away, and the river had said what it always says. Inside, caught by a tack stitch, lay a single gray hair threaded through a loop of dark auburn. It was stupid. It was everything. The plan did not change. Plans almost never do when the right token appears. They simply solidify, like sugar when the temperature is perfect. She tied the fold shut again and tucked it into the hem of her own cloak, where it would lie against her thigh and sting when she walked, to remind her of what pain is for when it is chosen. They went up. The postern accepted them, as it accepts women with work, and men too tired to be rules. Inside, the air tasted of rock and work, and a little glory if you had lived long enough to know the smell of it when it is shaved off a thing and saved in a jar for bad days. The yard was smaller now, because the task required nerves to be arranged a certain way in a body, and when nerves are arranged, the world comes closer to regard the arrangement. This time, when the inner door opened and a woman came out, it was the woman whose sleeve had brushed Sansa's sleeve the day before and not. Torchlight lies, and eyes lie, and grief makes conjecture and calls it truth. But there are truths that do not require witnesses, and a daughter knows her mother's way of moving through air, the way a sailor knows the sea he sails, by the sound of it touching the hull. Catelyn Stark had not yet turned her face. Sansa stood with her hands in the water and did not make a sound. The washer behind her half sang, half spoke. If the lady will have it, there is a cloth to be marked, and past the folded nothing that was everything forward through the relay of women without ceremony. And Catelyn took it as if it were a towel a servant had offered, and walked away with it, and in the same smooth motion dropped a different fold into the basket at Sansa's hip. A piece of white as innocent as milk. Sansa did not look at it. She did not look at her mother's hand. She wrung a sheet. The copper sang. The boy with the beetle was absent today. His absence made a space that women filled with a kind of ease that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with practice. Only when they were out again, basket empty and hands made raw to disgust suspicion, did Sansa open the white when they were under the reeds and the river had agreed to be their accomplice. Inside lay a twist of thread, blue, red, and a gray as soft as the bellies of doves. It was not a message a man would think anything of. It was not even a message most women would understand. It said, not now. It said, go to ground. It said, the door will open when the wheel stops for the changing of the buckets on the second watch of night, 2 more days from now. It said all this because Catelyn had taught her to read what was not written when she was small enough to sit on a stool in the solar and be a little in the way, and not in the way at all. Not now. Sansa said aloud, and the wanting that rose in her at the thought of having to carry this knowing 2 more days was nearly too large for her body. Soon, she added, as if speaking to a dog that wanted to be fed. Soon, Sandor echoed. He spat into the river as if to give it something to keep it from devouring them whole. 2 more days of being idiots without being interesting. Then we do the wicked thing. What is the wicked thing? She asked. The one we plan to survive, he said. And the look he gave her was all the fondness a man like him will allow himself. The kind that knows affection is just another word for responsibility when the world is shaped like this. They made themselves into ordinary again. They went among the scrub and scratched for tinder they would not light. They checked the mare's frog in stranger's mood. They spoke of unimportant things, whether the elder's flowers would make syrup if anyone had sugar, whether the geese were meaner here than in the north, whether the boy with the tooth would grow up to stare at something else with the same seriousness and give it a name it did not deserve. The sun set. The stars came on. Sansa lay and did not close her eyes for a long time, because sometimes looking is the only property left to a person, and it must be exercised to keep it. Sandor sat with his back against an altar that had no poetry in it, and watched the place where men would come from if they decided to come. Somewhere in the castle, a woman sat with her hands wrapped around themselves and did not let go. 2 days is a long time to think and not do. It is a long time to carry messages in your skin and pretend you are the same as you were when the message had not yet arrived. Sansa did the work the world allowed her to do. She washed and mended and listened. She learned the patterns of feet in the corridor, the difference between men who were carrying orders and men who were carrying their own hunger, the weight of a night when the sky would be too clear and the men would look up and become small enough to be cruel. She learned the habits of the guard with the spear and the time when a different man with a different beard would take his place. She timed the wheel. She counted the buckets. She learned the simple names of complicated things and the complicated names of things that were simple only when left in peace. On the second night, at the hour when the river looks like iron and the sky looks like it has been polished with ash, they went. The washer went before with her basket and her insolence. Sansa behind, cloak hem wet and heavy with purpose. Sandor, a part of the darkness where a man might be, if a man who intended to cause damage were to need to be. The postern allowed them because to refuse would have been to break a machine women had built, and men had forgotten to oil, but somehow still ran. Inside, every sound was a dart. Every shadow had a place to be. The wheel's chain made a small, even clatter like a rake being pulled over stones. Somewhere a man coughed phlegm up and swallowed it because he was not allowed to do otherwise. The yard held its breath in that way workyards do when it is not yet late enough to sleep and not early enough to assert itself again. The washer's hand, brief and bossy, touched Sansa's hip, pushing her toward the skirts corridor. Sansa went, the basket on her hip maintaining the story. The guard with the spear had a different beard tonight. He had a different way of standing too. One that said his feet hurt, and he resented his mother for giving him legs. He grunted and let them by even less than the night before. At the third door, the one with the bench behind it, the washer veered right and Sansa veered left. It was a daring as only little things can be. Left led to a stair that turned tight, a turret's inside. The stair was narrow enough that even a man who hated fire might think of being trapped here if a torch came, but Sansa did not let Sandor into her mind on that stair. She kept her own body the size of one step and her breath the size of her mouth. At the top, a small landing gave on a slit of walkway over the inner yard and a door without a guard. No one guards the door women open for themselves. There are too many. Sansa set her shoulder to it and slid inside and found herself in a passage where rushes had been spread thin and trodden down honest. There was light at the end, candlelight, steady with the weight of a person who had told it to behave and it had minded. She stepped into that light and stopped where she was, because any nearer would have made it foolish, would have made it something that could be overheard, and turned into a story told by men over wine. In the little chamber, a woman sat at a table with both hands upon a piece of cloth. Her hair was auburn and unornamented. Her face had new lines drawn upon it by an unsteady god. The cloth in her hands was a strip of blue with a hem done one way, and then the other, wrong on purpose as a code between people who had learned to speak without speaking. She looked up. For a moment, neither of them was anyone they had been made into. They were only a mother and a daughter in a small room with a candle behaving itself. Then the world snapped back on like a trap that had needed resetting. Catelyn Stark stood. She did not rush. She did not speak a name too loudly. She put the cloth down and came around the table with her hands out the way a midwife puts her hands out when a babe is crowning. Confident, competent, gentle, prepared to be strong. Sansa did not know she was crying until her mother's thumbs were at her cheeks, doing the old ordinary thing. collecting the tears as if they might be added to a jar and used later in case of drought. Catelyn put her forehead to Sansa's and breathed in as if she had been drowning, and this were air. Sansa breathed out as if she were a bellows, and her mother a coal. Neither of them said anything that would have made it harder to stop when stopping came. "You're thin," Catelyn said at last. "Because women must always start with a complaint that is love. And stubborn." "Yes," Sansa managed, the word shaking, and then standing firm. "And alive." Catelyn's mouth twisted into what must pass for a smile in a world that had killed the old kind. "That will do," she said. She stepped back and took Sansa in with the same swift inventory she had used to take in linen before a wedding feast, before the world remembered it had men in it. "How?" "Not now," Sansa said, half laughing through a throat that hurt. "Later. There is a man who waits and hates it. He is large and will not come in because his name has teeth. He brought me. He wants to leave with me when you say, and not be made to stand under banners while men argue about who gets the credit." "Men?" Catelyn's eyes, which had known how to be kind for longer than they had known how to be grim, softened with an amusement so quick it could be folded and put in a pocket and taken out in worse moments. "A hound who knows manners," she said. "There are not many. We will let him hate waiting a little more. Then we will open a door that was made to let water in and out without men's pride getting stuck in it. There are men here who owe me favors. Some of them remember how to pay. Lenderwansch." They sat, not because there was leisure, but because sitting is sometimes the quickest way to move a great distance. Sansa ate a piece of bread with honey that had been kept in a little pot, as if it were a relic, because sweetness is sacred when grief has a throne. Catelyn touched her daughter's hands as if convincing herself of their topography. Sansa told briefly the important parts. Bells, smoke, a man with a face that had broken and set itself wrong, and then learned to do a kind of right anyway. Reeds, women who knew the price of cloth. A wheel she had counted. Catelyn took this and threaded it onto the string of her knowledge of the world, and made it into a necklace she could wear, without men guessing what stones it was made of. 2 more hours, she said at last. When the second watch passes the north parapet and complains about his feet and tells the south watch that they should be ashamed of their youth, we will go. I will be a woman walking. You will be another. No one notices that. The man will be where he can be of use. After that. She exhaled, and for a second, the girl who had long ago flung her braids about in the river at River Run showed herself in the set of her mouth. After that, there is only the river, and the road, and men. We will make dough. Sansa looked at her mother's face and saw there the map of the country she wished to live in. It was not Winterfell. It was not River Run. It was a map made of fortitude and craft, and the refusal to let other people's songs decide your steps. She nodded. The candle burned exactly as much as it should, and no more. When she went back down the stair, the world resumed measuring her with its usual dishonest ruler. She carried a basket because baskets are protection. The guard with the different beard still resented his mother. The washer scolded the little child because scolding is love when you have no time to write letters. The river bit her ankles and let her go. Under the reeds, the large patient shadow looked at her with a question that was not words. 2 hours, she said. Sandor closed his eyes once as if something had been thrown at them. Then I'll be a mistake waiting to happen in the right place, he said. He ate something. You shake. I am done shaking, she said. I am only remembering it. And it was true. Her body had learned how to be a person again, and not just a cautionary tale. She ate. She drank. She wrapped the cloak tighter and thought of snow that did not burn, and of the hot water that ran under Winterfell stone like a promise men had not made, and so could not break. The moon rose and put a knife along the river. Somewhere, a goose honked as if he were a lord who had been left out of a meeting. A man on the parapet above the north wall cursed his boot, and then his mother. The man on the south wall called him a fool, and then admitted by silence that his own boot pinched. In the yard, a copper cooled with a long, soft sigh. In a chamber, a woman took a strip of blue and tied it around her wrist. as if it were a tourniquet for hope. They went.